Hello, beautiful people. In today's episode with Robbie Crabtree, we spoke about why he became a lawyer. We spoke about why he created his course, Performative Speaking. And we also spoke about some of his favorite examples from media that can help you with your public speaking today. Overall, it was a really great conversation. I really enjoyed this one. And if you enjoyed it as much as I did, let me know on Twitter at @HeyDannyMiranda. And let's just get right to it, guys.
Interesting people, thought-provoking conversations, nutrition for your brain. Journey through the minds of the world's top performers and discover what it really takes to achieve your highest version. This is the Danny Miranda Podcast.
Let's get right into it because I feel like you have so much that I want to ask you about, so let's just get right into it.
Let's do it.
Awesome. So, first things first, Robbie, I've looked into your background a little bit, and you're a lawyer and you have a lot of experience in law, but I'm super curious, and we're going to get to the law stuff in the future, but I'm super curious about why you started to put yourself out on the internet to begin with.
Sure. So I think that is looking at a couple different explanations. So first, I think we have the COVID explanation, is that the world just kind of shut down. So why wouldn't you take a bigger interest in the online world, right? You'll see kind of this explosion that I had of being in the online world starting in about June, which coincides pretty nicely with the height of COVID and when things were really shut down. And typically speaking, my life in the past has been very much outside of the online world. And I was working as a lawyer. I loved to travel. I made connections in the community, but then everything changed. So I really kind of went all in and started finding really interesting people online and on Twitter and decided, hey, this is a cool experience to really see what's out there. So the first answer is COVID. The second answer is I had started to have this idea of there had to be a way to turn my knowledge and what I was normally doing by giving away my time and turning it more into a product or some other form of distributing my information. So it wasn't just I could only work with one client at one time. And I saw the internet as the tool to use and bring that leverage about, which is why I started gravitating there originally back probably like Mayish, but it was really the introduction of the COVID shutdown in June that really kind of pushed me to just dive all in and see what was possible.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it reminds me of what Eric Jorgensen, who will be a future guest on this podcast, what he talked about when he came on about becoming the product yourself. And it sounds like you've had an influence from Naval Ravikant in that sense, in that you are creating now a product around your skills. So let's talk a little bit about that product. You have a course coming out soon on October 19th. And talk about why you decided to put this course out there and why you feel like it's exactly what's needed in people's lives today.
I think most people, if they're honest with themselves, when they're asked a question, are you a good speaker? Will answer no. Or if they're asked, are you a good communicator? The answer will be no. Are you a good listener? No. Those questions are really behind why I created the course. And this comes down to my background and what I've been involved with over the years, both as a trial lawyer and then also teaching persuasive speaking and communication techniques at the SMU Law School here in Dallas. So really what happened is I saw this need to learn how to speak better. And it's called public speaking. And really the way I like to describe it is my goal is not to make people professional public speakers. I want to make professionals into better public speakers. Because the way I look at public speaking is everything we do every day is public speaking. whether that's a conversation you have with your significant other, a conversation at a party, a Zoom meeting with your bosses, a pitch to investors when you're a startup founder. It could even be a larger type speaking engagement where maybe you're at a conference and giving a talk in front of 100 people. But it could also be when you're walking into your boss's office one-on-one and telling him that you're going to quit and go for a new job. But you don't want to burn that bridge, so you need a way to approach that conversation in a way that's beneficial for everybody. So public speaking is one of these things that's just everywhere to me. And what I quickly realized was there isn't anywhere online that's really doing a good job of this. And there isn't even anywhere out in the real world for the most part that's doing a good job of this. I know the biggest one will be Toastmasters. That'll be the one people hear of. But most people who I've talked to in that program generally feel like it's a little bit stuffy, or it's really geared towards a lot of like watching other people actually do the speaking, or geared towards actually becoming a public speaker. And that isn't my goal. My goal is to help people become better public speakers in their day-to-day lives. That will open up career opportunities, that will open up better life opportunities, because they can speak confidently, persuasively, authentically, and just really make a difference for them. So I realized in my teaching at SMU, I would normally have somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 to 200 students wanting to take my course. But due to the nature of the way I run the course, which is very practical with lots of experiential learning for the students, I could really only deal with about 15 students at a time, which meant there's this huge market just at SMU alone who wanted to take the course and I couldn't provide it, which is where you reference Naval, and I'll also reference Jack Butcher here, and their ideas of there's got to be a way that I can reach a broader market. And so as I was looking at designing a course that maybe would appeal to more of those students who wanted to take the class, the whole COVID thing hit, and I started to really dive into Jack Butcher's course and also David Perel's Rite of Passage. And that's where I saw, hey, there are these courses that are doing stuff in the visual design world, the visual communication world for Jack, and the written communication world with David. But there isn't anything for the spoken world, the spoken communicator. And I think it's more important now than ever because we're getting on these Zoom calls and we no longer have those 5-10 minute conversations at the water cooler because everyone's working from home. So when you get on a call, you have 10 minutes to make your idea known and you've got to make an impact. You get one chance and you're going to have a bigger set of eyes on you because you're bringing all these people together for this Zoom meeting. And I said, there's a way to do this, but nobody's figured it out yet because most of the people teaching public speaking are either just professional public speakers or they're some sort of actor. But they've never actually been in a room and had to teach students. They've never been in a courtroom and had to also do it themselves. And I said, there's a way to achieve this so more people can learn about it. And I started talking to people online. I started making these connections and running ideas by people, and it was resonating with them. And I said, you know what? It's time to build this. It's time to reach this audience outside of Dallas, outside of the law school, and help people become the type of speaker that's confident and likable and authentic and just makes them feel like a more empowered and confident person on a day-to-day basis.
I love it, man. And it sounds like you have the right plan and the right approach. What I'm curious about is, were you always a great speaker? Because talking to you for 10 minutes on the phone, I could tell you're a great speaker, but were you always this way?
The truth is no. I grew up when I was younger and had a stutter. So there were a number of years that I was very unsure of myself when it came to speaking because of that stutter, and I had to overcome that. Now, it would also be disingenuous to say I didn't have a natural ability to do some of this stuff, because once I overcame the stutter, then I did become much better at the speaking world. And especially in high school was really where I started to shine in this role. So I competed in different speaking type events for my school. I would upset my teachers every time because I also was a baseball player in high school. And the state championship tournament always coincided with those big speaking tournaments that we could go to. And I would always tell my teachers, sorry, I can't go to this. I'm I'm playing baseball instead. So I did a little bit of it in high school. I presented in what was our school's like prospective student weekend when I went to a private high school. So a bunch of middle schoolers and their parents and families would all come to check out our school. And I was one of 2 or 3 people that would get up in front of, 500,000 people and just talk about my experience at the school, why I thought it was a good fit for me, why it might be a good fit for them. And so I got pretty comfortable in that world. I also played college baseball, so I just have a natural, competitiveness, showmanship, all of those things that kind of come with being a competitive athlete. And then really where the speaking started to shine, though, was in law school, where I started to really getting the training that I needed. So I think what it really comes down to is I had those raw abilities, but I needed somebody to help me shape them, inform them, and give me the ideas so I could really go off and run and build them on my own. And luckily, when I was in law school, my teacher in the Persuasive Speaking course and my coach of my national mock trial team was really the one who guided me and helped me do that, which is funny because I now have a law firm where me and him are partners in the firm. We started it together, and now we actually co-coach that national mock trial team and co-teach at SMU the Persuasive Speaking course because he still has those original ideas. I took his ideas and expanded on them and brought my own kind of flair and flavor to them. So it's just been a very fortunate run. And I can't say that I was always great at public speaking. I think I always had those raw abilities, but it took some guidance and some coaching to help me fully take advantage of those abilities.
Yeah, man, that's really cool whenever you see a student who teams up with the teacher and almost becomes the peer. That's always really cool to see. I can't think of any examples off the top of my head, but going back to that baseball, you mentioned you played college baseball. You mentioned that you played high school baseball. It seems like at a high level. Were you the type of guy who was giving speeches, like pregame speeches to your teammates? Were you that guy that was giving those speeches? And if so, like, talk a little bit about that.
When I was playing baseball, I wouldn't say that I was necessarily the guy giving speeches. I actually liked to just lead by example. Mm-hmm. And so I thought if I went out and took care of business, people would follow. And that generally was the case. That doesn't mean from time to time I wouldn't give one of those type of, get your head straight type speeches or, hey, we got this, y'all. And so there were certainly times I did that. That was not like a day-to-day role that I embraced because I thought my words needed to have power. And if I did that every day, it diminished that power. Mm. So what I did is I tried to use it strategically and try to lead by example most of the time. But there's always those moments where the team maybe is just down, feels like they're out, or isn't as focused as they need to be. And sometimes you got to wake them up. So in those moments, yes, I would step up and I would deliver some sort of speech, some sort of, talk with the team. And right, they always take on a different characteristic depending on what you're trying to achieve. So sometimes they've got to be more intimate, more soft. Sometimes they need to be more explosive and more in your face. It just really depends on what's going on in that moment with those specific players because every player is going to be different too. So you've got to be able to read the situation, read the circumstances, and make the right strategic decision in order to really inspire and move the team in the way that you want it to be done. So that was always my approach was let's figure out when is the right time to do this so that it's not overused. And those times I did it, it was because it was absolutely imperative that we nailed that moment and I knew that we could get there.
Yeah, that makes sense. So kind of switching gears a little bit, you coach public speaking and you coach a team, right, at SMU. So talk a little bit about how coaching has transformed your relationship with public speaking and helped you with just helping guide another group of people and how that's helped your skills in the area, if at all.
Coaching is one of those terms these days I think it's thrown around way too lightly, where people, maybe they have some experience doing something and they think that just makes them a coach, but it doesn't. And coaching is one of those things that I really pushed back on doing for a long time because I didn't feel like I was prepared. And so to give a little bit of background on that, because I was on the national mock trial team at SMU when I went there as a law student, I graduated, I immediately got a job as a prosecutor, and the law school actually asked me to come back and coach immediately. And not the national mock trial team, but to coach just one of the lower level teams. And I told them no, because I said, there's no reason that I can be a coach. I haven't done anything. I haven't experienced anything. I don't have any credibility to back any of my words up other than I graduated law school. And it doesn't make me qualified to take on that role. So I told them, wait, and I'll tell you when I'm ready. So it took me about 5 years of real life experience, being a trial lawyer, getting in the courtroom, testing all these things out, seeing how jurors responded, seeing how judges responded, seeing how my bosses responded, before I finally felt comfortable going back to them and saying, all right, I'm ready now. So at that moment, I went back and started coaching with a lot of kind of trepidation, because it's a serious role. And I knew from my time, I had good coaches and I had bad coaches. I've had that in baseball, when I played basketball growing up as well, and certainly when I was on mock trial. There were some that were better than others. And I knew the influence that a good coach could have on the students, because I know my current law partner, like I know the impact he had on me. His guidance and leadership and coaching ability really transformed my life. So when I went back, I said, I've got to do this the same way. I've got to invest the time, put in the effort. I've got to do everything I can to build relationships with my students, my team members, and make sure that I get them to the point that I know I'm capable of. So when I went back, I really started testing ideas, because I think there's kind of two parts to being a good public speaking coach. One, you need to actually have done it yourself, so you can back up and say, I have this experience. I was a really good public speaker. I had great results, and this is why I am in a position to tell other people, here's how to do it. But the second part is you've got to be able to translate what you did and how you did it effectively so that other people can do it. And I think that's the hard part for a lot of coaches, is figuring out how to help other people learn your methodology and put it into practice. So the first year came with a lot of success, but I still had those concerns of, well, maybe it's just I got lucky. Maybe it was just this group, for whatever reason, my ideas resonated with them. So I was like, I need to check and run a second group to make sure that what I'm doing is really valid, right? It's kind of that scientific method idea of, we don't just do an experiment once, we make sure that it can be validated and repeated. So I wanted to do the same thing as a coach and make sure, hey, let's see what I can do. The other thing that I think has been helpful for me as a coach is I get feedback from my students. I'm not afraid to hear the good and the bad. I openly ask my students, hey, tell me the things that didn't work. Tell me what you didn't like. Tell me what did work. Give it all to me, because that's how I can be a better coach and better teacher. So the second year, I did all the training again and saw even better results, where every one of my students, they swept every single speaking award at the SMU Law School that year. And it was at that moment I said, okay, this is really onto something. I've now validated this approach that it can be taught to other people. And so now, I'm in my third year of coaching the national mock trial team at SMU. And it keeps getting better and better. Like, I see the results coming to my students quicker each year, because I'm getting better at what I do and figuring out how to really throw them into the deep end, but where it's still just safe enough for them, where they don't, fall apart and lose the effectiveness of the teaching method. So I think coaching is one of those things you just really have to dive all in. And Danny, it is exhausting. It is unbelievably exhausting working with these students and putting in this time and watching them develop. And it's exhausting because you're so emotionally invested into each and every one of them who you're working with. Like, there's so many times where I'm watching them and I want to stop them and say, no, do it this way. Like, do it the way I've told you. But you've just got to let them sometimes learn on their own and figure it out. And then you work with them. But it's amazing when you get those text messages from students who say, 2 months ago, I was a nervous wreck when I would get up speaking, and now I finally feel confident, and it's not perfect and it's going to keep getting better, but I feel like I can do this. Those types of comments, you realize, oh, this is making a huge difference in people's lives, and they can really bring about a change in their, not just their speaking ability, but also their overall confidence and their overall self-development. So the coaching thing is by far my favorite aspect of honestly anything I do, just because I get to see the change that it can have on other people.
It's beautiful, man. So you talked about in the first year of your coaching getting criticism about certain things that, the students believed you could be doing better. Talk a little bit about what those criticisms were and what you learned from the first year exactly.
Yeah, that was a tough one. When you are hearing that some of the things you're doing aren't as effective as you would like to. And it really comes down to one thing, and I think this is the big problem a lot of coaches have, is sometimes when you've been doing something for so long, you take for granted that something that seems easy to you is not easy to other people. Mm-hmm. That was by far the biggest issue I came in contact with. That my students would say, you think this is easy. It's not. It's really hard to understand this concept. So, for instance, for me, it's really easy to think of the concept of speaking like music and basically playing it in my head so that it sounds musical as I'm delivering it. That is a really hard concept for a lot of the students to understand until they understand it, which means I can't just tell them, hey, make it sound like music, because it doesn't make any sense to them, which means I've got to bring in examples. I've got to show them how that looks. I've got to perform it myself so they can start to understand. I need to show them other examples, maybe from television or movies. I need to actually tell them, go listen to this song, go listen to this speech, start picking up on these dynamics and see how it sounds then. And that's by far the biggest thing I had to come in contact with is they don't know most of the stuff that I know. So a lot of the foundational stuff that I just assume people understand about public speaking, even these really talented law students don't understand a lot of those basics, which means I've got to cover them. I've got to give them that foundational stuff before they can move on to the more complicated and those kind of pieces that take you from 90% to 100%. And that was by far the biggest learning lesson. In fact, when I wrote my personal user manual on my website recently, I talked about that, of saying, like, I've got to understand that people don't always know what I know. And that's been a hard realization to come to. But that feedback from those students in that first year has made me significantly better moving forward, because now I am much more aware of that every time I'm teaching.
Very cool. So you mentioned that you use examples from different speeches or different movies. Do you have any off the top of your head that you can think of that someone could look up right now and that we can include in the show notes of a really good public speech or a really good just TV appearance or movie that someone can look at and be like, oh, that's a job well done right there? And if you could break down why that's a job well done. Kind of putting you on the spot here, so let me know.
You're good. I got you, Danny. So my favorite example would be, there's an episode in The West Wing, and it's where President Bartlett is giving a speech after there was a bombing at Kennesaw State. It's season 4. I can get you the exact episode here at the end of the show, and you can drop it in the notes. The reason I will point out to that speech is it's just incredibly moving and powerful. And it's the way that he uses his tone, his volume. He goes very soft, but he also gives this kind of inspirational message. It's beautiful language and the analogies that are given. At one point, he's talking about that the streets of heaven are filled with angels tonight. And he talks about how swimmers ran into the fire, and he actually will wait. And then he says it again, into the fire. And it's just this moment where the way he's breaking that down and making it so impactful by pausing, saying that last piece really slowly in reinforcement, that it hits you and you realize, oh, he's saying that these swimmers like put themselves into danger by running into a building that was on fire to try to save others. And that's a powerful human spirit imagery. It's not long. It's maybe 3 minutes of a speech, but it is just incredibly powerful and incredibly moving. I will say at pretty much anything you can watch from The West Wing is a great example. I also really like pointing out the movie 300. And if you watch that, there's so many great speeches in there. What is interesting is that everybody remembers the really big, loud moments. This is Sparta type moments and Persians. If you want them, come and get them. But if you watch that whole movie, what you should really be paying attention to is most of the speaking is done very slowly, very calmly, and very quietly. What that is able to achieve is in those big moments, it draws a bigger distinction between the two so that those big moments really stand out, because the other moments are done so perfectly and so calmly, so beautifully, that when you hear that loud, "This is Sparta," it's one of those, whoa, that is a big moment. I need to pay attention. And so there's so many great lines in that movie and just overall speeches, both from Leonidas himself and from Delios when he goes back in front of the council and explains kind of what happened at Thermopylae. And then he's talking in front of all of the Greeks before they are in the battle on the plains of Plataea, before they actually defeat the Persians. Like, it's just beautiful. And you hear the way he delivers it, and it's calm and it's quiet and it's inspiring, but then he also raises his voice at the right moments. And you can pick up on all of these nuances of great speaking techniques in these seemingly silly movies or TV shows that are fake and pop culture-y. But that's what I love about public speaking, is you can learn from almost any source.
I love two things stand out. One is that you can and we can use fiction or fictional movies to help us in real life. I love that part of it. Another part that I love is you talking about the quietness of one of the characters' voice. And I find it really interesting when talking, when people pay attention to the voice of the speaker, it's often because they're using their voice quietly. And in our head, intuitively, maybe we might be thinking like, oh, the loudest person is going to get the most attention. But it's really interesting because you know that quiet friend you have? When he says something, everyone pays attention because everyone's like, well, he might have, if he's quiet all the time and he's hiding what he's saying most of the time, well, if he's actually speaking now, this is important. So I love that you brought up those two examples.
It's exactly right, Danny. And one of the things I love to point out to people when I'm trying to use this example to help them understand is, what is a person's natural reaction when somebody is speaking quietly? They lean in, right? They want to hear what that person is saying. What happens when somebody is really loud and yelling at somebody? They recoil and back away. Now, which one would I prefer my audience to have? I'd much prefer them interested in leaning in to see what I'm saying than recoiling and pushing back against me.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself. So I want you to I brought up some tweets from you, and I just went through some of your tweets and just picked out some of my favorite ones. And I want you to kind of riff on some of these tweets, right?
Sure.
So one of them that I loved, and this is the reason that I found your account and started following you, because this tweet was so magical to me. It was, when you listen, you're speaking. What you're saying is, you matter. And I just love that quote. So please riff on it a little bit.
Yeah, I think this one hits on this idea of active listening and really being a participant in a conversation. And I think so many of us today don't take that active role when we're listening. We think, oh, this is our time to be off, or this is our time to think of what we're going to say next. And really, if you can just be silent and pay attention, you are communicating to that other person that their statements, their thoughts, their words matter, because I am giving you the time to sit there and actually engage with you and hear that. I am giving up my time so I can hear what you have to say. And I think anybody who is a human would say, to me, that makes me feel like I matter. The example I love to use, again, to kind of point out this idea of why people are so bad at this is when we introduce ourselves, most people don't hear the other person's name when they introduce themselves. Mm-hmm. Like we're really bad about that because we're sitting there thinking, I've got to introduce myself. So I need to make sure I know what I'm going to say, which is absurd because we all know our names. Like, I don't understand. How are we having to focus on, my name is Robbie. I know this. I could do it in my sleep. And yet we are so focused on what's going on in our head instead of listening to what the other person says that we end up missing these really important moments. And that's really what that tweet was kind of geared around was pay attention to people, listen to what they have to say, give them your time, give them your energy, give them your focus. And what it's going to say to them is they matter. And that makes a better connection between the two of you.
On the name example, rather, what do you think we could be doing better in that situation? Other than obviously just paying attention and listening, what would you tell someone who's really bad at remembering people's names?
So there's two kind of distinctions that I want to point out. So there's a difference between not remembering and not hearing. And I think most people actually don't even hear. And I've certainly been bad about that in my past. And I've made a real effort to focus on that, where somebody will introduce themselves and I'm like, I didn't even hear what they said. And it's a horrible, horrible trait. So I've really worked on that. An easy way, obviously, to force yourself to do that is as soon as they introduce themselves, you just respond with their name back to them, right? So if you introduce yourself and said, hey, I'm Danny, when I'm introducing myself, I'd say, hey, Danny, I'm Robbie. Mm-hmm. And it's an easy way just to reinforce, to make sure we listen. It's kind of a triggering mechanism that if I know I have to respond back with your name, I'm going to make sure I listen. Now, I still may forget it, but that's different than not hearing it. And my bigger issue is when we're not even hearing.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's a great tip. Okay, so now here's another tweet for you that is your tweet. You said, find people 2 or 3 steps ahead of you. Watch what they do, read what they write, ask them for help. Do the first 2 before the last for better results. The question that stuck out to me is, who are the 2 to 3 people? You've mentioned a few before, but who are the 2 or 3 people that are 2 or 3 steps ahead of you?
Yeah, you've probably heard their names, but I will say Jack Butcher is a big one who I feel is 2 or 3 steps ahead of me. And I've read or watched and listened to pretty much everything that he had to say. I know the types of people that he's reading. I mean, I know Naval had a huge influence on him. In fact, he just illustrated the book with Eric Jorgensen on Naval. So that is probably a big one. The other one too is I felt like David Perel was probably in that same world, maybe 2 or 3 steps ahead of me. He kind of had the online writing school going. I would read his writing. I would listen to his podcasts. And then I would reach out and I've had conversations with both these people. I've talked to them quite a bit about what I'm doing. I mean, I did office hours with Jack 2 weeks ago. I talk to David pretty regularly these days about different things, whether it's course related or just public speaking related. In fact, you may have seen he tweeted out something yesterday from a rabbi talking about how our voice is our most valuable tool, and yet most people don't know how to use it, which was interesting because he reached out to me to be like, this is beautiful. And I agreed. And I said, it actually reminded me of a different West Wing scene that I used when I was in a murder trial that I drew inspiration from, where Toby Ziegler, the communications director, was actually talking to a rabbi, and they were talking about vengeance is not Jewish, and the way that the scene was set with the music and the tone and the pacing and the volume that they were using and different oratory techniques that they used throughout that kind of conversation that really stood out with me, that I wanted to be able to recreate in my trial when I was trying this murder case. But I sent that to David and say, hey, if you're interested, you should check this out. It's one of my favorite scenes. So, that's really kind of, that advice is coming from really what I've been doing, is finding those people that I think are 2 or 3 steps ahead of me. And to be fair, they might be more than 2 or 3 steps ahead of me. But in my view, that's kind of what I see it as. And then I read what they have to write and listen to what they have to say. And then once I'm prepared and feel like I'm in a position to really add something to their world or bring some sort of value, then I start reaching out and ask for some level of help and also try to help them in any way that I can.
Yeah, it's really cool when you have creators that you look up to or you read or follow, and then you could actually start communicating with them and asking them for help on your problems because you formed a relationship with them. I just find that to be such a cool experience. And I've had the pleasure of doing that on this podcast already with so many different people. So I totally relate to that feeling of just like knowing what someone put out is really good stuff. And then for them to be able to help you, it's like, the internet is crazy, man. The internet is the most crazy thing that's ever happened. And the fact that we're living through that, I mean, it brings me so much joy. So yeah, man.
Yeah.
Go for it.
I know you just had Oliver on your podcast, and just to throw out another one, he is another guy who I really looked up to and started reading all of his stuff and just kind of seeing how he thought, how he approached things. And I, again, reached out and have formed a pretty good relationship and connection with Oliver, and he's been a huge help. So, I mean, I remember when I first got on Twitter and I was like 180 people, and Oliver was, I don't know, a couple, like 10, 12, 15,000. I mean, the guy's a machine on Twitter.
Yeah.
But he's got these great ideas, and he knows how to build an agency and understands marketing and understands sales funnels, and just a really interesting and smart guy. And all of a sudden I started finding myself, because I was engaging with him and reading what he was having to say, and his Twitter course, like I looked into that and obviously went through that free Mighty Networks program he put out. But, then I was able to get on a Zoom call and talk to him, and now I regularly communicate with him and just run ideas by each other. And it's just a crazy world we live in, where if you actually do those things that I said in that tweet, people are more than happy to give you their time and give you their energy, which is just unbelievable.
It's the most absurd thing ever. Your final tweet that I want to talk to you about, which is kind of paradoxical, at least it seems that way on the surface from a lawyer. It's a short one, but it stuck out to me. And that's, walking away wins more arguments than words. Expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, so that actually comes from experience as a lawyer. And typically speaking, the easiest way I ever found to win an argument, to win a negotiation, any of that sort of stuff, was be prepared to walk away and understand the ramifications that may have and be ready to deal with them. But the person who is willing to walk away is always going to be in the strongest position, because you don't feel like you have to make a deal. You don't feel like you have to win the argument. You can just walk away and end it, which puts the other person in a weaker position. Because if they really do care about winning the argument, that means now they've got to come back to you, right? It's kind of the idea of, if you're a military historian, you always wanted to have the high ground, right? Like that was always the goal, have the high ground so the other side had to attack you. They had to come uphill, make it difficult. It was easy for you to defend that position. The same is true when you leave an argument and you walk away. You've taken the high ground because you said, I'm not going to engage in this. You get more time to kind of think through your thoughts. You get more time to put yourself in a more emotionally powerful position. And the other person, if they want to continue that argument, is going to have to come to you, which means they're going to have to come and give something away in order to make you re-engage with them. And so I found that to be true in negotiations and also in arguments. I mean, for years, it's been true in hundreds of them, if not thousands. And it's amazing how effective that is. But you also have to be really comfortable in yourself and your own abilities and say, I can back this up. Like if I leave and end the argument or end the discussion, I can still move forward. It just may be tougher, and I'm willing to embrace that rather than trying to win this argument that's not going to go anywhere. So it takes a level of self-confidence and a level of kind of understanding of what your skills are. But it's amazing how often you will win. And even just on a basic level, like even let's say it's not a high stakes argument that you're in, most people, when you walk away, are going to reevaluate and say, man, I overreacted there. I shouldn't have been saying that. I thought on it, right? Cooler heads can prevail when you just kind of walk away. But the problem is, if you continue to engage in that argument, it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. I mean, arguments don't resolve themselves when we're in them. They resolve themselves afterwards when we say, man, I shouldn't have said that. I took that too far. Or, yeah, I just had like a skewed perspective. Or maybe my day wasn't good that day. And if you can change the situation, change the scenario where you're having that discussion, you can take it from an argument back to discussion by saying, hey, it got too heated. Let's get it back down to where we can actually talk it out and figure things out.
Yeah, it's so interesting when we put space in between an argument and ourselves. We can almost see that and be like, oh, I was overreacting, or oh, I made a mistake. But sometimes in the moment, it could be so difficult because you're so convinced of your position being accurate and you want to be right. And then you sleep on it or you step away and you're like, oh, wow, I actually shouldn't have said that. It's really interesting how that happens. Why do you think that happens?
I think emotions start leading us down a road where we can't control them. Like once emotion takes over and we lose that kind of logical and rational side of our brains, it's just about winning. And it's about winning at all costs, which means we're willing to say anything, do anything in order to achieve that. But that's incredibly detrimental for the long term. And I think that's part of when I'm saying you'll win more arguments by walking away, is it's not just you'll win that immediate argument, but it will be better for you long term. Because somebody knows when you're having a discussion, you're doing it from a reasonable and rational mindset, which kind of frames them to automatically believe in the future, if you're in a discussion, that you're in a place of looking at it logically instead of looking at it emotionally. And so I think it's just really hard when we get in these really heated arguments to get out of them because we are so invested emotionally. And then it starts to feel almost like a duel where it's like a, one-on-one, a fight to the death. And that shouldn't be how we're looking at these kinds of conversations, because the truth is most arguments we're having are with people that we care about or relationships that we want to maintain. And if we go down that route of win at all costs, you may win the argument, but you've lost a friendship, you've lost a relationship, you've lost a connection. And in that way, I would say you actually lose more arguments. You may have won the battle, but you've lost the war.
Yeah, it's powerful. So kind of switching gears a little bit, Robbie, why do you become a lawyer? What was it that about law that attracted you to it? Was it the public speaking aspect of it? Was it something else, the justice element of it? Talk to me about why you became a lawyer to begin with.
So I wrote a tweet the other day, since you were bringing up tweets that will probably help. And I said, in order to play the game, you have to learn the rules. But in order to win the game, you have to break the rules. And the truth is, lawyers write the rules. Everything in our society is based off of laws and rules that are governed by lawyers and judges, which meant to me, if I wanted to understand these things, I had to actually study them, which means go to law school, become a lawyer. And that was really the first big reason why I wanted to become a lawyer, is just to figure out how our society works and what that meant for me. Now, from there, I also wanted to become a lawyer because we'll go back to television, but The West Wing is my favorite television show. And that show is a bunch of politicians and lawyers. And I said, man, those people seem really cool. I'd love to do something like that. The third aspect is I was a college athlete and I love competing. I always have, I always will. And being a trial lawyer felt like competition to me. It was the closest thing I could think of in what, we'll call the real world or the grown-up world or whatever you want to call it, that felt like competition that wasn't being a professional athlete. And unfortunately, I wasn't going to be a professional athlete because I wasn't quite good enough to do that. And being a trial lawyer gave me the means to still go into, the trenches, get in there, get dirty, get in the fight, and see who ends up coming out on top. So I just love that aspect about being a lawyer, and specifically a trial lawyer. So I think it was really all those pieces came together. And also I was a history major, which let's be honest, being a history major does not open up a lot of job opportunities for you out of college, which meant I needed to do something in order to get paid for the rest of my life.
I love it, man. That makes complete sense. This show and this podcast is about breaking down some of the high performer tactics that people use. And so a professional baseball player might go to the batting cage and might study film. What does a trial lawyer do to train their mind? What does their preparation look like? Break that down for us and explain to somebody listening like myself who has no idea what a trial lawyer does to prepare. What do they do exactly? What do you do exactly to prepare for a big case?
So, obviously the first part to prepare is knowing the case just really well. Knowing every fact, every document, having it stored in your head, just knowing the ins and outs where there's nothing that's going to surprise you. That's obviously step one. And that is the very unsexy work of just putting in the time and putting in the effort to actually understand that. Now, if we want to really take it from just having that level of preparation to how do I actually achieve a victory, a win, that's a lot more nuanced. And that requires a lot of strategic thought and talking to other people and basically pitching ideas repeatedly over and over and over to the point that your family gets tired of hearing about it. Your friends get tired of hearing about it because they've heard you deliver some form or fashion of questions, speeches, ideas, themes, all of this to them 10 times, 20 times, 30 times, and they've just had enough. So it really requires you just being completely comfortable pitching and talking to people to get their feedback. And you're trying to find different viewpoints, people who maybe are your target audience, and start figuring out how they're reacting to things. And then this will be one that's probably more unique to myself than others. And this will, it kind of ties into why I created the Performative Speaking online course, is that I do a lot of preparation by drawing inspiration from pop culture sources, TV shows, movies, those types of things, or even like experiences I've had, places I've gone. And I say that because my whole thing when I'm prepared to go to trial is I want my jury to feel a certain way throughout that trial. I need them to feel an exact mood, an exact vibe, an exact feeling. What I'm trying to do is almost transport them out of that courtroom into something different. And that requires a lot of thinking, strategy, and a preparation that involves looking at where is this done effectively in other mediums and how can I create that in a courtroom using really just myself as the performance piece. And so that's where I go back to a lot of these things I love. And so, you can find inspiration from like Stranger Things has a very like 80s synthwave vintage type feel. Maybe I want that to be the feeling that people have. Or maybe I want it to be the Social Network type feeling. Or maybe I want it to be Tron Legacy. Maybe I want it to be Ex Machina. Like there's all these different sources. And I look at them through the lens of what are they doing to achieve this? What's the music like? What's the pacing like? What's the volume? How are the characters talking? What's the set design? What's the lighting design? How are characters dressed? What's the pacing? How do they tell a story? And I'm looking at all these pieces to see, I know that a certain movie made me feel a certain way, which means they did something effective. And I've got to figure out what was effective on me and how do I translate that to my audience? And that's really, I think, what separates a good trial lawyer from a great trial lawyer is putting in that kind of time and effort and attention to detail to really transport your audience to somewhere completely different where they feel like they're not just in this cold and sterile courtroom, but instead they're almost living a scene in a movie so that I can make them feel the way I need them to feel so they'll do what I want them to do.
That's very powerful. Can you give us an example of you doing that with a specific movie or a specific scene? Because I'm super curious about how this goes down and what the thought preparation is like.
Yeah. So let's go to the scene, because this is the most recent one I've used, and it's a very, very simple one for the audience to probably understand. Is they can simply go and watch this too. Is the episode 7, season 1, Take the Sabbath Day in the West Wing. And it's where the communications director goes in to talk with his rabbi. And he's wrestling with the idea of capital punishment, because somebody has asked the president to step in and stop a death sentence to somebody. And Toby is kind of wrestling with, what should I do? I don't believe in the death penalty, but I don't want the president to get involved in this. And he goes to his rabbi, and he's talking to him one-on-one. And they're having this conversation. And what you'll see there is, one, the lighting. It's kind of very dark and moody, which makes you immediately feel almost this melancholy emotion as you're watching it. You then have this music that's playing. And what actually happens is there's a singer up on the stage who the rabbi says is practicing for a funeral ceremony coming up. And it's this song that's it's really hauntingly beautiful. But you're immediately taken to this place of, like, this is a real sense of sadness that has overcome this entire synagogue. And there's no one else in it. It's just an empty synagogue besides Toby and the rabbi and then the singer. But you can feel this sadness envelop the entire synagogue. And they're sitting there talking. And the rabbi is talking about vengeance is not Jewish. He's speaking very slowly. He's speaking very calmly, quietly. He's taking big pauses in there. And you're just kind of feeling this sense of dread. And the rabbi is giving examples of, yes, certain things say that they're right in the Torah, but that doesn't mean that it's right in the current age. And it was such a powerful scene because the way he's approaching it really resonated with me in that moment. I could feel the sense of sadness, and I could feel the sense of, yes, there is a law written, but there's also this other thing that's more justice in the current age. And so what happened is I really tried to embrace that entire scene when I was delivering my closing argument in this murder trial. And I was on the defense. And to be clear, the defendant had killed his brother. There was no doubt about it. It was on video. He had said some terrible things in the heat of the moment. But as a former prosecutor who tried, I think 99 cases as a prosecutor, I typically am more state oriented. But I truly thought this was a case of self-defense. It was a tragedy, but it was self-defense. And so the guy should not be found guilty of murder. He should not be going to prison. And I truly believe that. So I'm sitting there in this moment with these incredible stakes on my shoulders of somebody who I don't think is guilty of something could go away for the rest of his life to prison if I fail. So what I did in this closing argument is I really tried to embody that scene. And so what that looked like to me is I had to be incredibly quiet. Almost my entire closing argument was done in a whisper. So my jury had to lean in to hear me. It was done in a very calm and slow and controlled pacing. It was done in a way that tried to bring out this emotional feel where I was moving very slowly. I was moving very deliberately so that they were seeing it. So I was also at times having a conversation with just a single juror and trying to connect with them almost as though it was like the rabbi talking to Toby in that moment. And what ultimately ended up happening is throughout that closing argument, every juror started to cry and started to feel that emotion because it had fully kind of enveloped them as they're listening to me tell this story and tell them why they shouldn't find him guilty of this. And it was really because throughout the entire closing argument, all I kept thinking was, how had the West Wing scene set that mood so effectively on me? And how could I recreate that for the audience? And that's everything I did in that closing argument was designed in order to do that. And luckily it was successful. And so the person did not end up, he was found not guilty. So he got to go home.
Wow. That's powerful. That's powerful stuff. And to move a jury to tears, that's something that you could now put on your resume, right?
Yeah, it doesn't happen a ton. It happens some, but I tell people, and this is a weird thing to experience, is as you really start getting very confident and comfortable in your public speaking ability, you can almost slow down time and you can almost step outside of yourself and almost watch yourself do it. And when you are speaking in this way, if you get to that emotional level, you can actually feel yourself feel that same emotion. And it doesn't happen often, but when you really nail it and hit it just right, you'll feel chills down your arms. You'll feel the emotion boiling inside of you. And you have just really hit that sweet spot of, if you're feeling it, the audience is feeling it too. And so it can just be very, very successful. And you know, that scene helped me because, like I said, the rabbi was talking about vengeance is not Jewish. So I just turned that a little bit and used vengeance is not justice for my theme throughout the entire thing, and just continued to point back to that as the North Star. Vengeance is not justice. And so that's what I love about this public speaking world is, and kind of the way I look at it is, there's so many sources of inspiration. It doesn't have to be this stuffy, you know, clinical approach where you're just watching these great and powerful, or, you know, the Winston Churchills. You can go and watch a movie and draw inspiration from that and use it to really move an audience.
Wow. So before we wrap this up, tell everyone who's maybe on the fence about taking performative speaking, talk to them about why they should go and make that leap if they're not convinced from the past 55 minutes worth of incredible public speaking from you.
Speaking is one of those things that when you do it right and do it well, opportunities that you didn't realize existed will start to present themselves. Essentially, it's a little bit like that moment in the Chronicles of Narnia when the children walk through the wardrobe and they see this whole new world. That really is what having a mastery in these skills looks like and feels like on a day-to-day basis. So whether it's somebody who just wants to be more confident in their daily life and be a better speaker and be more vulnerable and be more authentic, whether they just want to be more likable when they go to parties and be able to bounce around networking events and carry on good conversations, or tell stories at the dinner table over a bottle of wine. Maybe they're a startup founder who's trying to pitch people their idea is worth something and they need an investment. If you can't communicate your ideas, people can't support them. And instead, somebody else who can communicate an idea better than you is going to succeed ahead of you, which means you've got to master these skills. And there's no better time than now. As we continue to move forward, speaking is going to take on an even greater level of importance. So the course and what I'm trying to build is just something that helps people become the public speaker that they can be, so that they're confident and likable and personable and authentic and vulnerable and all the things you want to be, and just make you a more interesting human being at your job, but also a more interesting human being on a day-to-day basis. And I think the magic in this course is going to be the amount of practical experience people are getting. The breakout rooms are going to be used in a way that I've not seen used yet, where you are with a group each week and that rotates and you end up getting tons of practice in front of them, and you're giving bigger speeches in the course and you're getting feedback from myself. My hands are involved in every piece of this process. I just think the community aspect of it is, we're already at 30 people who are in the course, which means it's a great group of people already signed up. You're not going to be in this thing alone, and they're there to support each other and help each other. And I think that's where the magic is going to lie, because I can give a lot of the teaching and the guidance that's needed, but it's going to be the community that really comes together and makes that multiplier effect really happen. And you look, the truth is, at the end of the day, you're going to make a ton of friends and build a network of people that you're going to want to stay in touch with, that you're going to want to continue to build as you move forward. And it's just going to increase your overall value as a person and as a group as you come together and finish up the course.
Awesome. And the link for that will be in the show notes for this episode. Robbie, before we wrap this conversation up, I couldn't not ask you, how did I do? What is your assessment of my public speaking? What could I improve? Let me know.
So to be honest, Danny, you do a good job of just asking questions. And I think there's such a value in that. And too many people struggle with that. you really kind of, one of the things I liked a lot about what you did is you loop answers that I just gave and follow up on them in a very natural way. I'll finish something, you'll say, speaking of that, can you tell me more? And I think that that's such an important part of being a good active listener, is not interrupting somebody and saying yeah and a bunch, but instead just demonstrating that you paid attention by being able to reference something they said in their answer and following that up with your next question. So all in all, Danny, I was very, very impressed with how you handled everything, man.
I really appreciate that, brother. Tell me and tell everyone listening where they could find you on the internet.
Yeah, a couple places. You can find me on Twitter, which is at Robbie Crab, ROBBIECRAB. I'm pretty active on there. I'm sure you can back that up, Danny. I also have a personal website, which is robbiecrab.com. There'll be a link to the Teachable page for Performative Speaking if you want more information about that. You can also sign up for my newsletter, which is 3 Things Thursday. That can be found at substack.robbiecrab.com. But really, if you just want to talk, reach out to me on Twitter. If you have questions about the course, if you have any sort of questions about public speaking that I can help you with, reach out. I love to help people, love to talk to people about this sort of stuff. And I'm always doing my best to answer and just have real connections with people, because that, I think, Danny, as we both know, is really what this whole thing is about, is building connections with people and making new friends.
Absolutely. And all of those links will be in the show notes for this episode. Thank you so much for joining us, Robbie. And I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Appreciate it, Danny. You too.
That was my conversation with Robbie Crabtree. If you enjoyed this episode, let me know on Twitter at HeyDannyMiranda. Feel free to sign up for my newsletter, Tuesday Treasure. You can find that at DannyMiranda.com. And thank you so much for listening until the final seconds. I really appreciate you. And please, please, please have an incredible, incredible day. Until the next one.